Hello there, seeker of silence. Come closer and settle where the fire burns low but steady, where the stone beneath your feet holds the warmth of stories told long before this night. The road beyond these walls may stretch far into shadow, but here, the world narrows to the glow of embers, the quiet weight of old tales, and the steady voice of one who remembers them. If these quiet stories bring you peace, feel free to subscribe and return whenever the path grows heavy beneath your steps. Now listen, far beneath the mountains of Middle-earth, where light has not reached in many long years, there are halls that no longer echo with hammer or song. Some were abandoned in haste, others were sealed with care, and a few, it is said, were never meant to be found again. It was toward one such place that Barin Stonehand walked, his boots striking against the uneven path with a slow, measured rhythm. He was not young, though his beard had not yet turned fully to silver, and his shoulders carried the weight of both tools and memory in equal measure. The path he followed wound along the edge of the Iron Spine Mountains, where jagged peaks rose like broken teeth against the sky. Wind moved through the high passes with a low, constant murmur, carrying with it the scent of cold stone and distant snow. Barin paused once, resting a gloved hand against the rock beside him. The surface was rough, worn by time, yet familiar in a way only a dwarf could know. "Still standing," he murmured, almost to himself. There was no answer, of course, only the wind and the faint shifting of gravel beneath his feet as he resumed his climb. He had not set out in search of gold, nor jewels. Those were the concerns of younger dwarves, or of those who still believed that the deep places of the world held riches waiting to be claimed. Barin knew better. What lay beneath the mountains now was older than treasure, and often less willing to be disturbed. Still, he had come, because of a map. It had been given to him in a place far from the mountains, in a low-ceilinged hall where the fire burned brighter than the ale was strong. The one who handed it over had said little, only that it had been found among the belongings of a long-dead scout, tucked between pages of worn parchment and marked with symbols that no one there could fully read. Barin had taken one look at it and known. Not the path, not entirely, but the hand that had drawn it. The marks were not random. They followed the old ways, ways that spoke of halls carved deep, of chambers set with purpose, of passages that wound not for ease but for meaning. And so he had packed his tools, slung his pack across his back, and begun the long journey north. Now, as the sun dipped lower behind the peaks, he reached the place where the path ended. Before him stood a wall of stone, sheer and unbroken, to any eye that did not know where to look. Barin stepped closer. His fingers traced the surface slowly, moving across the rock with careful attention. To most, it would have seemed like nothing more than rough stone, shaped by time and weather. But to him, there were lines, faint, worn, hidden beneath layers of age. He exhaled softly. "Still here," he said. From his belt, he drew a small hammer and a narrow chisel. The tools were simple but well kept, their edges clean, their weight balanced. He placed the chisel against the stone, not where it looked weakest, but where it felt right. Then, with a single precise strike, a hollow sound answered. Barin paused, then struck again. The second sound was clearer, deeper, as though the mountain itself had shifted slightly in response. He set the tools aside and pressed both hands against the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint tremor passed through the wall. Dust fell in thin lines from above, drifting down in the fading light. The surface before him shifted, not outward, not breaking, but moving aside, as though guided by a mechanism long forgotten by all but the stone itself. A narrow opening revealed itself, dark, still, waiting. Barin stood there for a moment, studying the passage. No light came from within, no sound. Only the deep, unmoving presence of a place that had not been touched in many years. He reached for the lantern at his side, lighting it with steady hands. The flame caught slowly, then steadied, casting a warm glow that pushed back the dark, just enough to shape the entrance. "Let's see what you've been holding," he said quietly. Then, without hesitation, he stepped inside. The air changed at once. Cooler, denser, carrying with it the faint scent of old stone, and something else, something that lingered just beyond easy recognition. Barin moved forward at a steady pace, his lantern held low. The light revealed walls carved with deliberate care, their surfaces marked with patterns that spoke of craftsmanship rather than haste. This had not been a mine alone. It had been a hall, a place built to last. His boots echoed softly with each step, the sound traveling ahead of him and returning in quiet layers. After a short distance, the passage widened. The ceiling rose, supported by thick pillars carved directly from the mountain itself. Each one bore markings along its length, symbols worn but still visible in the shifting light. Barin approached one, lifting the lantern slightly. He studied the carvings, not names, not records, something else. "Wards," he murmured. "Protective, perhaps, or guiding." He traced one lightly with his fingers, then stepped back. The map had shown this place, not in detail but enough, and beyond it, deeper still. Barin adjusted the strap across his shoulder and continued on. The hall stretched forward, then turned, leading him into a section where the stone darkened, its surface less worked, more natural. Here the air felt heavier, not threatening, but aware, as though the mountain itself had begun to take notice of his presence. Barin slowed his steps. He listened. Nothing moved, and yet the space did not feel empty. He reached the bend in the passage and paused. The lantern's light flickered slightly, casting shifting shadows along the walls, then steadied. Barin exhaled. "Just stone," he said. But even as he spoke, his hand moved instinctively to the handle of the pick at his side. Not drawn, not yet, only ready. Beyond the bend, the path descended, and somewhere below, something waited, not with hunger, not with malice, but with the quiet patience of a place that had been left behind and had not forgotten. The passage sloped downward with a steady, deliberate curve, each step drawing Barin deeper into the mountain's quiet hold. The air grew cooler as he descended, and the faint scent he had noticed before became more distinct. Not unpleasant, but old, like stone that had long been sealed away from wind and weather. His lantern cast a narrow circle of light ahead, revealing the path in pieces rather than all at once. The walls here were less refined than the upper halls, their surfaces uneven, marked by the careful work of tools rather than the finishing touch of craftsmen. This had been a working place, not for gathering wealth alone, but for reaching something. Barin moved at a measured pace, his boots finding stable ground, even where the stone shifted slightly beneath him. He paused once, crouching near the wall, where faint lines ran across the surface in a pattern too regular to be natural. He brushed away a thin layer of dust. The markings beneath were shallow, almost worn away entirely, but enough remained for him to recognize their purpose. "Direction markers," he said under his breath, "not for guiding out, for guiding in." He stood again, his gaze following the line of symbols as they curved along the passage. Someone had not wanted this place lost, only hidden. Barin adjusted his grip on the lantern and continued. The descent ended in a chamber wider than any he had passed through before. The ceiling rose high above, disappearing into shadow beyond the reach of his light. Thick columns stood in a ring around the space, their bases rooted deep into the stone, their tops carved into shapes that resembled interlocking arches. At the center, a platform. Raised slightly above the surrounding floor, its surface smooth and deliberate, as though shaped for purpose rather than convenience. Barin approached slowly. His footsteps echoed more clearly here, the sound traveling outward and returning in faint, overlapping layers. He stopped at the edge of the platform. The stone beneath his boots felt different, not looser, not worn, but settled, as though it had been shaped to hold weight and had done so for a long time. He lifted the lantern higher. The surface of the platform bore markings, not etched deeply, but laid across it in thin, intersecting lines that formed a pattern too complex to follow at a glance. Barin knelt. His fingers hovered just above the stone. "Not a forge," he murmured. "Not a vault." His hand lowered, brushing lightly across one of the lines. The reaction was subtle, a shift, not in the stone itself, but in the air around it. Barin withdrew his hand at once. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Something passed through here," he said. "Not recently, but often." He stood again, his gaze moving across the chamber. There were no tools left behind, no broken crates, no scattered ore, no signs of haste or abandonment, only space, and the faint impression that this place had once been used deliberately. Barin circled the platform once, his steps slow, his attention fixed on the details others might have missed. At the far edge of the chamber, he found another passage, narrower, less worked. The markings along its entrance were different from those above, deeper, sharper, as though carved with greater intent. He studied them for a moment. "These weren't made to guide," he said quietly. "They were made to keep." He lifted the lantern slightly, letting the light fall across the stone. The symbols did not reflect it evenly. Some seemed to catch the glow more strongly than others, their edges sharper, more defined, as though they had not worn with time in the same way as the rest. Barin exhaled slowly. "Still holding, then?" He stepped closer. The air at the entrance to the passage felt denser, not blocking his way, not resisting, but pressing inward slightly, as though acknowledging his presence. Barin stood there for a moment. Then, with a steady motion, he crossed the threshold. The change was immediate. The sound of his footsteps dulled, the echo fading into something softer, more contained. The walls closed in slightly, the ceiling lowering just enough to shift the sense of space. The stone here was darker, its surface smoother, as though shaped not by tools alone, but by something else. Barin slowed. The lantern's flame flickered once, then steadied again. He moved forward, step by step. The passage did not twist or turn as the others had. It led straight, deeper, as though it had been carved with a single purpose in mind. After some distance, he noticed it, a faint line along the floor, running parallel to the walls, too straight to be natural, too subtle to be decoration. Barin crouched beside it, lowering the lantern. The line was not a groove. Not exactly. More like a seam, a joining of two surfaces that did not quite match. He reached out, pressing his fingers lightly against it. The stone was cold, colder than the rest. He withdrew his hand slowly. "Not a passage," he said, "a boundary." He stood again, his gaze following the line as it continued forward, disappearing into the dim light ahead. The air shifted slightly, not a movement, not a breeze, but a change in pressure, as though the space beyond the line held something different from what lay behind it. Barin adjusted the strap across his shoulder. He did not turn back. Instead, he stepped over the line. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, the lantern dimmed. Not extinguished, but reduced, its light pulling inward as though the space around it had grown heavier. Barin stopped. He listened. The silence here was not empty. It carried weight, not threatening, but present. As though the mountain itself had drawn a breath and was holding it. Barin's hand moved instinctively to the handle of his pick once more, still not drawn, only ready. He took another step, then another. The passage widened again, though only slightly, enough to reveal a shape ahead. At first it seemed like nothing more than shadow. Then, as the lantern's glow reached it, the shape took form. A doorway, not carved, not built, but defined. The stone around it curved inward, framing an opening that was darker than the darkness around it, as though it led not just deeper, but elsewhere. Barin approached slowly, each step measured, each breath steady. He stopped just short of the threshold. The air here was different again, not heavier, not lighter, but hollow. He raised the lantern slightly. The light did not reach far inside. It seemed to fade, not gradually but all at once, as though the space beyond did not accept it. Barin stood there studying the opening. Then quietly he spoke. "Not sealed," he said. "Left." He lowered the lantern, and for the first time since entering the mountain, he did not immediately step forward. Because whatever lay beyond that threshold was not simply forgotten, it had been set apart. And now, it waited. Barin remained at the threshold for a moment longer, the lantern's glow resting against the edge of the opening without truly entering it. The darkness beyond was not like the tunnels he had passed through. Those had depth, shape, a sense of distance. This was different. It did not stretch. It did not recede. It simply was. He shifted his weight slightly, listening. No echo came from within. Even the faint sound of his breath seemed to settle at the edge and go no further. Barin exhaled once, steady and controlled. "Built to hold something," he murmured. Then, with a slow and deliberate step, he crossed the threshold. The change was immediate, not in sight, but in feeling. The ground beneath his boots remained solid, the stone unbroken, yet the sense of space around him shifted, as though the air itself no longer followed the same rules as the halls behind him. The lantern dimmed further, not flickering, not failing, just reduced. Its glow now clung close, revealing only a small circle of the ground and the faint outline of the walls. Barin moved forward, each step placed with care. The walls here were smooth, but not worked, not carved by tool or hand. Their surface bore no marks of chisels, no lines of shaping or smoothing. Instead, they curved inward slightly, as though formed by pressure rather than effort. Barin ran his hand lightly along the stone. It felt wrong, not unstable, not fragile, but unfamiliar in a way that did not belong to the craft of dwarves. He withdrew his hand. "Not made," he said quietly. "Changed." The passage did not bend. It led forward in a straight line, yet the sense of distance remained uncertain. The lantern revealed the next few steps, but beyond that the space seemed to fold inward, as though unwilling to show more than necessary. Barin continued. After a time he noticed it. A sound. Faint. Not from ahead. Not from behind. But from within the space itself, like a slow drawing of breath, though no lungs were there to hold it. Barin stopped. The sound did not stop with him. It continued, low, steady, not rhythmic, but present. He listened for a moment longer, then spoke. Not alone then. The sound did not change, but the air shifted slightly as though acknowledging the words. Barin tightened his grip on the lantern and moved on. The passage opened without warning. One step, the walls close around him. The next, space, wide, uncertain. The lantern's glow stretched outward, revealing a chamber larger than the one above, but far less defined. The edges of it seemed to fade, not into shadow, but into something less solid. Barin stepped forward slowly. The ground here was level, though not perfectly so. Subtle rises and dips broke the surface, giving the sense that the stone had settled unevenly over time. At the center of the chamber, a shape. Barin raised the lantern. The light reached it, but did not fully hold. It was a structure of some kind, not large, not tall, but deliberate. Stone set upright, though its edges were worn smooth, its surface unmarked by any carving or symbol. Barin approached. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from effort, but from the way the space seemed to press inward as he moved. He stopped a short distance from the structure. It stood silent, still. Yet the air around it carried that same hollow presence he had felt before. Barin circled it slowly. No seams, no markings, no clear purpose. And yet, "This is where it gathers," he said. The words settled into the space and did not echo. He reached out. His hand hovered just above the surface. The air tightened. The faint sound shifted slightly, growing more distinct, though still without direction. Barin held his position, not touching, not yet. Then, slowly, he pressed his fingers against the stone. The reaction was immediate, not from the structure, but from the space around it. The air pulled inward, tightening in a way that was not forceful, but undeniable. The lantern dimmed further, its glow shrinking until it barely outlined his hand. Barin did not move. The sound changed. Not louder, but closer, as though whatever had filled the space had drawn nearer, without crossing the distance. Barin's eyes narrowed. "You're here," he said. No answer came, but the pressure increased slightly. Not enough to harm, not enough to push him back, only enough to be felt. Barin withdrew his hand. The pressure eased at once. The lantern's glow returned, faint but steady. He stepped back, slowly. The sound receded, though it did not vanish. Barin exhaled. "Not bound like the others," he murmured. He looked around the chamber again. This place had not been carved to hold something in a fixed point. It had been shaped to allow something to move, to gather, to spread. He turned his gaze back to the structure. "An anchor," he said, "but not the same kind." The words settled into him, as much as into the space. Above, the halls had held markings, boundaries, guidance. Here, there was none, only presence. Barin adjusted the strap across his shoulder. Then slowly he reached into his pack. From within he drew a small piece of chalk, worn but still usable. He knelt near the edge of the chamber. Carefully he marked the ground, a simple line, then another. Not a circle, not yet, just a beginning. The air shifted again, subtle, measured, watching. Barin stood. He did not complete the marking. Instead, he stepped back, returning his attention to the structure at the center. "You're not meant to stay here," he said quietly. The sound responded, not with movement, but with a change in depth, as though the space itself had leaned closer to hear. Barin's voice remained steady. "And you're not meant to leave." For a moment, nothing changed. Then, the faintest distortion appeared, not in the stone, not in the ground, but in the space just beyond the structure. A subtle bend, as though the air had shifted out of place. Barin watched it carefully. The distortion lingered, then shifted slightly. Closer. Not toward him. Toward the boundary he had begun to mark. Barin did not move. "You feel it," he said. The distortion flickered. For a brief moment, it held shape. Not clear, not complete, but enough to suggest something. Tall, uneven, and then it thinned, unraveling into the space once more. The sound faded slightly. The pressure eased. Barin remained where he stood, watching, listening, understanding. "This isn't the source," he said at last. "It's the place you return to." The chamber did not answer. But it did not need to, because the pattern had begun to take shape, and whatever moved through this place was not confined to it. It passed through, gathered, then moved again. Barin lifted the lantern slightly, casting its faint glow across the chamber one last time. Then he turned. The passage behind him waited, unchanged, but no longer unknown. As he stepped back toward the threshold, the sound followed. Not closely, not reaching, but present, watching. And as Barin crossed back into the narrow passage, the lantern brightened, just slightly, enough to remind him that what lay behind him was not gone, only held at a distance, for now. Barin did not rush his return through the passage. The place behind him remained present in a way that distance did not lessen. It did not follow. Not in the sense of movement or sound, but it lingered at the edge of awareness, like a thought not yet finished. The lantern's glow steadied as he crossed back over the seam in the floor. The air shifted with it. He felt the difference at once. The weight lessened. The space regained its shape. Barin paused, turning his head slightly, as if listening for something that might have remained behind. Nothing answered, only the familiar stillness of carved stone. He exhaled once, slow and measured. "Two places," he said quietly. "Two purposes." His gaze moved back toward the deeper passage for a moment longer. Then he turned away. The chamber above felt different now, not changed in form, but in meaning. The raised platform at its center no longer seemed like a place of work or gathering. Instead, it carried a quiet tension, as though it had once held something that no longer rested there. Barin approached it again. This time, he did not kneel. He walked its edge, his steps slow, his attention fixed not on the surface, but on the space above it. The air here was lighter than in the chamber below, yet it was not empty. It held traces, not of movement, but of absence. Barin stopped at the far side. He lowered the lantern slightly, watching how the light settled across the stone. It did not behave as it should. The glow spread unevenly, bending slightly near the center, as though the space above the platform resisted being fully seen. Barin's brow furrowed. "Something was here," he murmured. "Something that no longer holds." He reached into his pack once more. From within, he drew the folded map. Carefully, he opened it across the stone. The parchment was worn, its edges softened by time, but the markings upon it remained clear enough. Barin studied them in silence. The upper halls, the chamber, the deeper passage, and then a second marking, faint, almost overlooked. He leaned closer. The symbol did not match the others. It was not a guide, not a boundary. It was a connection. Barin traced the line with his finger, from the deeper chamber to the platform. He exhaled slowly. "You were never meant to be separate," he said. The realization settled into him with a quiet certainty. The lower chamber did not hold the presence, it gathered it, and this place, this platform, had once given it form. Barin folded the map again, setting it aside. He stood in silence for a moment, letting the understanding take shape. Then he spoke low and steady. Something changed. The chamber did not answer, but the air shifted slightly, as though acknowledging the thought. Barin's hand moved to his beard, brushing it lightly as he considered. "The anchor below still holds," he said. "But this..." He looked down at the platform. "This has weakened." He stepped onto it. The stone felt firm beneath his boots, unbroken. Yet the space above it remained unsettled. Barin crouched. Slowly he placed the lantern at the center. The light spread outward in a soft circle. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint distortion appeared, subtle, barely visible, a slight bending of the air just above the surface. Barin did not move. He watched. The distortion flickered, not forming, not gathering, only reacting. "To what remains," he said. The words were quiet, but certain. He reached into his pack again. This time, he drew a thin length of silver wire, worn, carefully kept. Not a tool for mining, but for something else. Barin held it between his fingers, feeling its weight. "Not broken," he murmured. "Just undone." He began to work. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed the wire into the stone along the edge of the platform, tracing a line where the markings beneath were faintest, not forcing it, guiding it. The metal bent under his hands, shaping itself along the surface. The moment it settled, the air reacted. The distortion sharpened slightly, not stronger, but clearer. Barin continued. He traced a second line, then a third, not forming a full circle. Not yet, only rebuilding what had been, piece by piece. The lantern's glow flickered once, then steadied. The space above the platform tightened. Barin paused. He looked up. The chamber around him remained unchanged, but the center now held a faint sense of presence, not complete, but returning. He exhaled. "Enough for now," he said. He did not finish the work. Not yet. Instead, he stood and stepped back from the platform. The air held its shape for a moment, then softened slightly, though not entirely as before. Barin nodded once. A start. He turned toward the passage leading upward, the path back to the surface. But he did not take it immediately. Instead, he moved toward the entrance of the deeper passage once more. He did not cross into it. He did not need to. He stood at the threshold, watching the darkness beyond. The lantern's glow reached only a short distance inside, but the sense of it remained. Still, patient. Barin spoke quietly. "You're not meant to gather there," he said. "No more than you're meant to form here." The air beyond the threshold shifted slightly, not answering but aware. Barin nodded once, then turned away. The climb back through the upper passages felt shorter than the descent, not because the distance had changed, but because the path was no longer unknown. The markers along the walls passed beneath his gaze. The pillars of the upper hall stood as they had before, and at last, The narrow opening in the mountain wall came into view. Barin stepped through. The air outside struck him at once, cool, moving, carrying with it the open scent of the mountains. The sky had shifted toward evening, the light dimming as shadows stretched across the rocky path. Barin stood there for a moment, letting the change settle. Then he looked back at the entrance. The stone had closed behind him, seamless once more. No sign remained of the passage, only the mountain, silent, unbroken. Barin adjusted the strap across his shoulder. His gaze lingered on the rock for a moment longer. "Not lost," he said quietly. "Just waiting." He turned, beginning the walk back down the path. The wind moved around him, steady and low, and though the mountain now stood behind him, the pattern he had uncovered remained clear in his mind. Two places, one that gathered, one that formed, and something between them that had begun to move, not freely, not fully, but enough. Barin's steps remained steady as he descended, because the work was not finished. It had only just begun. The path down from the mountain felt longer in the fading light, not because the ground had changed, but because Barin now carried more than tools and memory. The pattern he had uncovered rested firmly in his thoughts, turning slowly, settling into place, piece by piece. The wind moved along the ridges with a low, steady sound, brushing against stone and cloth alike. It carried no warning, no urgency, only the quiet sense of a world continuing as it always had. Barin did not hurry. Each step found its place. Each breath remained even. By the time he reached the lower slopes, the last light of day had begun to slip behind the peaks, leaving the sky dim and colorless. He paused once, turning back toward the mountain. From here, there was no sign of the entrance. No line, no mark, only rock. But Barin's gaze lingered. "Two places," he said quietly, "and something between." The words settled into the wind and were carried away. He turned, continuing on. The small camp he had left behind lay nestled between two outcroppings of stone, sheltered from the worst of the wind. A low fire had burned itself down to embers, its faint glow just enough to mark the place in the growing dark. Barin approached without sound. He knelt beside the fire, feeding it a few small pieces of wood. The flame returned slowly, catching with a soft flicker, then rising just enough to cast light across the surrounding ground. He set his pack down beside him. For a time, he said nothing. He simply sat, watching the fire take hold again, its light steadying in the quiet. Then, slowly, he reached for the map. He unfolded it once more, laying it flat against a piece of stone. The markings seemed clearer now. Not because they had changed, but because he had. His finger traced the lines again, the lower chamber, the upper platform, the connection between them. Barin exhaled. "It was never meant to break," he said. He leaned back slightly, his gaze lifting from the map to the darkened horizon beyond. The flow was meant to hold. He considered that for a moment, then nodded, once. "Not to trap," he added, "to shape." The fire shifted, sending a small burst of sparks upward before settling again. Barin's attention returned to the map. He studied the connection once more, then his gaze narrowed slightly. "There's something missing." He tapped the parchment lightly. The line between the two chambers was clear, but incomplete. It did not show how the movement began, only where it passed. Barin folded the map slowly. He did not put it away. Instead, he held it in his hands for a moment longer. Then he spoke again, his voice low. "You weren't meant to form on your own." The thought settled, and with it, a question. Barin's brow furrowed slightly. If the shaping fails, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to, because he had seen enough. The presence below did not gather fully. It shifted, moved, tested the space around it, and above, the platform no longer held it, which meant, "It's finding its own way," he said. The words carried a quiet weight, not urgent, not alarming, but certain. Barin set the map aside, then reached into his pack again. From within, he drew the small charm he had used earlier, its surface worn, its markings faint but still present. He turned it over in his hand. "This held once," he said. "Or something like it." He looked back toward the mountain. The dark shape of it loomed against the sky, silent and unmoving. Barin's gaze lingered. "If the form returns," he paused, then finished the thought. "It needs to return correctly." The fire burned low. The wind shifted slightly, and the night settled deeper around him. Barin did not sleep long. He did not need to. When he rose again, the sky had not yet begun to lighten, but the darkness had changed, softened slightly, as though the world itself was preparing to shift once more. He gathered his tools without haste, the wire, the vials, the charm, each one placed with care. Then he stood. The mountain waited, as it always had. Barin adjusted the strap across his shoulder, then began the climb once more. The path felt familiar now, not easy but known. The wind moved differently this time, brushing against him in uneven patterns, as though the air itself had begun to shift along the slopes. Barin noticed it. He said nothing, only continued. When he reached the place where the entrance lay hidden, he did not pause. His hands found the stone without searching. The chisel struck once, then again. The hollow sound answered. The stone shifted. The passage opened. Barin stepped inside. The air changed at once, cool, still, holding. The lantern's glow returned, steady and contained. Barin moved through the upper halls without stopping. The pillars, the markings, the chamber, all passed beneath his gaze without hesitation. He stepped onto the platform again. The lines he had begun remained, faint, incomplete, but present. Barin set the lantern at the center, then knelt. "This time," he said quietly, "we finish it." He reached for the wire. Carefully, he continued the pattern. Each line placed with precision, each connection guided by what remained beneath the surface. The air responded, slowly, deliberately. The distortion above the platform returned. More clearly now, not strong, not stable, but forming. Barin did not rush. He completed one line, then another, then closed the shape. The moment the final line settled, the chamber changed, not visibly, but in the way it held itself. The space above the platform tightened, the distortion steadied. For a moment, longer than before, it held. A shape, not complete, but closer. Barin exhaled. "Good," he said. He did not rise. Instead, he reached for the charm. He placed it at the center of the platform. The reaction was immediate. The lines beneath it seemed to deepen, their presence more defined. The distortion sharpened. Barin lifted his gaze. "Hold," he said. The word settled into the space. The form did not collapse. It did not fade. It remained. For a moment. Then it shifted, not breaking, but turning, as though drawn elsewhere. Barin's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked toward the passage leading down. "The other place," he said. He stood. The work above was not complete. but it was enough, for now. Barin lifted the lantern, then turned toward the deeper passage once more, because whatever had begun to form above was still moving below, and the two were no longer separate. Barin did not pause at the edge of the lower passage this time. The threshold no longer felt uncertain. It felt expected. The air shifted as he stepped across the seam in the floor, the lantern dimming slightly as before, its glow pulling inward as though the space ahead required less light, or perhaps allowed less of it. He moved forward with steady steps. The sound had returned. Faint, measured, not constant, but present enough to mark the space as something more than empty stone. Barin listened as he walked, not searching for direction, but for change. Because now he knew what to expect. The deeper chamber did not hold the presence, it gathered it, and above, the platform had begun to shape it once more. The balance between the two had shifted, and whatever moved between them had begun to notice. The passage opened into the wide chamber again. The edges of it remained uncertain, the space beyond the lantern's reach refusing to settle into clear form. At the center, the structure stood as before, unmarked, still. Yet the air around it had changed. Barin felt it at once. The hollow presence was no longer spread thin across the chamber. It had drawn closer, not fully contained, but less scattered. He stepped forward slowly. The ground beneath his boots held firm. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Barin stopped at the edge of the central space. "You've felt it," he said quietly. The air responded, not with motion, but with a tightening, a slight shift inward that marked awareness. Barin nodded once, "As you were meant to." He moved closer, each step measured, each breath steady. The structure at the center did not change, but the space around it did. The faint distortion appeared again, not flickering as before, more defined now, still incomplete, but present. Barin watched it carefully. "You're not meant to stay here," he said, "and not meant to wander." The distortion shifted slightly, not toward him, not away, only reacting. Barin's hand moved to the vial at his belt. He uncorked it with care. The scent rose into metallic, grounded, carrying a faint weight that seemed to settle into the space itself. He did not pour it onto the structure. Instead, he traced a line along the ground. Slow, deliberate, a boundary, not to trap, but to guide. The moment the line settled, the air responded. The hollow presence tightened. The distortion sharpened slightly, its edges holding longer before thinning again. Barin continued. He extended the line, not forming a circle, not yet, only narrowing the space, drawing it inward. "You move through what isn't held," he said quietly. "Then we hold it." The words were simple, but they carried. The distortion shifted again, this time closer. Barin did not step back. He held his ground. The lantern's glow stretched across the chamber, catching the faint edges of the forming shape. For a moment, it held, longer than before. A figure, not clear, not whole, but shaped enough to suggest form. Barin exhaled slowly. "That's it," he said. The figure wavered, then steadied again, just slightly. Barin reached for another vial, this one smaller, sealed with dark wax. He broke it carefully. The scent that followed was different, heavier, touched with something older than stone. He poured a thin line across the first. The reaction was immediate. The air tightened. The hollow presence drew inward, not resisting, but responding. The distortion sharpened further. For a brief moment, the figure held more clearly than it had before. Tall, uneven, its edges uncertain, but no longer unraveling at once. Barin did not move. "Not here," he said. The figure flickered, its form shifted slightly, turning though there was no clear direction to the movement. Barin followed it with his gaze. "Above," he added. The word settled into the space, and for the first time, the presence responded with intent. The distortion did not fade. It moved, not fully, not freely, but enough. It drew slightly upward, toward the unseen passage beyond the chamber. Barin nodded once. "You remember?" The figure wavered again, then held. Barin stepped back slowly, not retreating, giving space. The boundary he had traced remained, holding, not forcing, only guiding. The presence lingered at its edge, not crossing, not dispersing, only gathering. Barin's voice remained steady. "You don't belong to this place alone." The air shifted. The pressure eased slightly. The figure thinned, but did not vanish. Instead, it remained, contained, not fully, but enough. Barin exhaled. The balance had changed again, not complete, but closer. He stepped back further, moving toward the passage. The lantern brightened slightly as he approached the threshold. The space behind him remained present, watching, but no longer reaching. Barin paused at the edge. He looked back once. The chamber lay still, the structure unchanged. The presence held closer than before, not gone, not free, but guided. Barin nodded. "For now," he said quietly, then turned. The passage back felt lighter. The seam in the floor passed beneath his boots. The air shifted. The lantern's glow widened. Barin moved through the upper chamber once more. The platform waited. The lines he had completed held. The charm at its center remained still. But the space above it had changed. He saw it at once. The distortion there was clearer, more stable. Not complete, but no longer fading as it had before. Barin approached slowly. He lifted the lantern. The light caught the edges of the forming shape. For a moment, it held, longer than any time before. Barin exhaled. "Good," he said. The words settled into the space. The figure wavered slightly, then steadied again. Barin did not reach for it. He did not need to, because now it was beginning to hold itself, not perfectly, not fully, but enough. Barin stepped back. The platform held. The chamber held, and the movement between them had slowed, not stopped, but shaped. He nodded once. "Almost," he said, then turned toward the path above, because what remained would not be finished by force, only by time, and by holding the shape long enough for it to remember how to remain. Barin did not leave the halls at once. He remained in the upper chamber, standing just beyond the edge of the platform, the lantern resting low in his hand. The light it cast moved gently across the stone, tracing the lines he had set, the faint patterns beneath, and the space above that now held something steadier than before. The figure lingered there, not fully formed, not fixed, but present in a way it had not been when he first arrived. Barin watched it without speaking. There was no need for words now. The work he had done had not ended the movement, only narrowed it, given it shape, guided it towards something it could hold. He exhaled slowly. "Not finished," he said at last, "but enough." The air in the chamber felt different, not lighter, not heavier, only settled. The tension that had once stretched between the two places had drawn inward, no longer pulling outward across unseen paths. Barin stepped closer to the platform once more. He did not climb onto it. He only stood at its edge, looking at the charm resting at its center. The markings upon it caught the lantern's glow faintly, their worn lines reflecting light in uneven patterns. "Old work," he murmured, still holding. The figure above the platform shifted slightly, not reacting, not moving with purpose, only adjusting, as though finding balance. Barin nodded once. "That will do." He gathered his tools without haste, the empty vials, the remaining wire. Each one returned to its place with care. The map, folded once more, slipped back into his pack. Nothing was left behind. Nothing needed to be. When he lifted the lantern again, the chamber responded. Not with change, but with a quiet stillness that no longer pressed inward. Barin turned toward the passage leading upward. His steps were steady, measured. The path no longer held uncertainty, only distance. The climb through the upper halls passed in silence. The pillars stood as they had before. The carvings remained unchanged, but the space between them felt different. Not because it had been altered, but because what had moved through it no longer reached as far. Barin paused once near the entrance. He turned his head slightly, listening. Nothing answered. And yet, he remained there for a moment longer, as though marking the place in memory. Then he stepped forward. The stone shifted, the passage closed behind him, and the mountain stood once more as it always had, silent, unbroken, holding its depth without revealing it. Barin stood outside, the cool air moving around him, carrying the scent of rock and wind. The sky had begun to lighten, faint color returning along the horizon. He adjusted the strap across his shoulder, then looked back once. The entrance was gone, but the path remained, not in sight, but in understanding. "Held," he said quietly. The word carried no certainty of permanence, only the recognition of what had been done and what might remain. The descent from the mountain came with a steady rhythm. Stone gave way to gravel, gravel to worn earth. The wind softened as the slopes lowered, its voice less sharp, more distant. Barin did not hurry. There was no reason to. The work did not call him forward with urgency. It simply rested behind him, as it should. At the base of the slope, he paused once more. The land stretched outward, uneven and quiet, carrying the same shape it had held before his arrival. No mark of the deeper halls showed, no sign of what lay beneath, only the surface, as it had always been. Barin's gaze moved across it slowly, not searching, not expecting, only noting. The pattern he had traced would not remain visible. It never had, but the movement within it would hold. For a time, he nodded once, then continued on. The road stretched ahead, long and winding, disappearing into the distance where hills met sky. Barin walked it without hesitation. The lantern at his side burned low, its light no longer needed in the growing day. His tools rested where they belonged. His steps found their place without thought. Behind him, the mountain stood. Within it, the chambers remained. The lower place, where something gathered. The upper, where it held shape. And between them, a path now narrowed, guided, not ended, but no longer without form. Barin did not look back again. There was no need. Because the work had never been about closing what lay beneath, only understanding it and giving it just enough shape to remain where it belonged. The wind moved lightly across the land. The sky continued to brighten, and the road, as always, carried him onward, not toward an end, but toward whatever waited next, beyond the turn, beyond the hill, beyond the reach of what had come before. And somewhere, deep beneath stone and time, the mountain held its quiet once more, not empty, not forgotten, simply resting within the shape it had been given.